Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Laura, good morning. It's nice to meet you face to face. Well, as face to face as Zoom can allow us to be here.
Better safe
Welcome
than
to
sorry.
the Suncoast Writers Guild. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Laura Perez. She is going to give us a program on diversity, inclusion, and sensitivity. Laura is a multi-genre author with Palmas Publishing. She is a prolific writer. She's got a series of at least 5 books that I saw on Amazon. They are lesbian, romantic, suspense thrillers, the Targeted series, and they chronicle the exploits of Detective Sidney Russo. Laura also writes under the pen name of M.L. Davila. Did I say that right?
Yep, Davila.
Okay, Davila. All right. Her mantra is strong women, strong stories, and her goal of empowerment translates to writing no matter what genre is being covered. Laura, thank you very much for coming today. We're looking forward to your talk. We have a pretty good turnout here, so.
I see that. Thank you for having me. Let me see. I'm trying to push you guys over. Hold on one second. So, am I able to share my screen?
Sure.
There we go.
Yes.
Microsoft PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, are you letting me? Are you letting me? Oh, you would think I'd be more tech savvy as many times as I've done this. Okay. And let's see. Did I start the slide? No. So how is everybody?
Great.
Doing great.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Great.
Weathering the storms.
Weathering the storm. That's pretty much what life is right now, is weathering the storms.
Correct.
So I've done this presentation in different incarnations. And depending on who my audience is, I tailor it for the audience. So I'll actually be doing this for the FWA conference in October as well, or a variation of this, because it'll be a little bit more hands-on since we'll be in person. But this is one of those things where when writers hear the word sensitivity or sensitivity reads or diversity, some folks shut down, you know, and I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen visibly, and I've seen that happen just in a presentation where folks will shut down, and immediately it's one of those things where, I don't know why I have to learn this. I'm diverse already. You know, I include everyone. I do this, I do that. And it's not, it's about awareness. And that's really all it is. It's about awareness. And it's one of those little things that unless you are from an underrepresented group or a visibly diminishing group in terms of ability, you don't, not that you don't get it, but you have to learn about it, if that makes sense. So I never do any of these things to offend. And if anyone has questions at any time, please just speak up, say so, and I will try to explain as best I can. Okay. I am not the end all and be all, but I do come from a background where, and this is something I realized when I lived in Northern Virginia and moving here, is that when I enter a room full of writers, let's say, I am the only me there is. And that's very, it's disconcerting. It's very isolating. Okay. And unless you have felt that, where you are the only you there is, it's really hard to understand where folks are coming from when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and sensitivity in writing and publishing. Unfortunately, society tends to go 100%, 180 degrees to the opposite. So it's like when it was Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden, all the publishers were looking for was books written by Black people. And that's not a positive either, because that is not inclusive. So, you know, you have both sides here, and it becomes a difficult journey for a writer, for any writer, of any age, of any background, because you almost don't know what eggshells not to step on. You don't know where the eggshell is, where the coal is, where this is, you just don't know. So I'm going to dive in with just a couple things, primarily some examples of what these things actually are. And then we're going to talk about some of the concerns that there have been about certain books throughout the years. Okay, especially in today's world, we have so much going on with banned books and everything else. And there's a reason for all of that. Okay, and it's a 4-letter word, and it's not the one that you think. The 4-letter word that involves all of this and results from all of this and the lack of is fear. That's all it is. Fear of the unknown, the other. Okay, so who am I? Author, publisher, 15 years in corrections, 4th degree black belt, published in different genres. I've done anthologies. I have a bachelor's in criminal justice, and I'm a thesis shy of my master's in cultural anthropology. And I did that on purpose, the cultural anthropology, because I wanted to learn of the other, because I've always felt like the other. And I wanted to learn it from the other point of view. I'm a freelance writing, publishing consultant for Macmillan Books. I do sensitivity reads for them. And I'm a host of a podcast where we can get a little salty sometimes, but it's just a simple podcast. So diversity, obviously that's the first one we're going to talk about. These are all the words that kind of get tossed in and out when we talk about diversity. And I remember my mom, God love her, she passed away 2 years ago. My mom she was Peruvian, and she was racist, pure and simple. She was raised in Peru. She was 90 years old when she passed, and she was taught the triangle. And I don't know if you all remember the triangle from school, but it's the race ethnic triangle, where in the Spanish countries, if you were white, you were at the top. If you were of indigenous and white, you were down at one corner. And if you were Black, African, and white, you were at another corner. If you were just Black or indigenous, you were right at the bottom. That's it. That's all there was. That's all they were taught. So my mother brought that here to the States in the 60s. And she had a rude awakening, because in the 60s, things were changing. And so as we grew up, we had to fight the racism that was in our home, because my mother was racist. Then she learned not to be just racist because there were prejudices there. There were biases there. And my mother was a writer. My mother was a writer from the time she was 9 years old until the day she died. And when you read her work, you saw the racism. You saw the prejudices in how she spoke of people. It got better as she got older, as she educated herself. And that's what this is. This is just like a little doorway. It's something for you to pursue more, okay? It's not for me or anyone to ram down anyone's throat, because you have to understand something like this at your own pace. So diversity means more than just acknowledging and or tolerating a difference. It's more than that. It's conscious practices, understanding and appreciating that we all live here. We all need each other in order to continue forward. And it's one of those things that we don't see from our own little bubble. We just don't. We don't see it from our bubble. But watching the news doesn't give you that either. So it's one of those that this is a lot of self-taught stuff. You have to look stuff up. You have to ask the questions, ask your neighbors, talk to people. As a writer, I'm sure you all interview and talk to people all the time. I love to eavesdrop. Excuse me. I love to eavesdrop, especially at the theme parks, because you have people from all over the world and you never know what they're going to say. And sometimes it's eye-opening, and sometimes you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they actually believe that, but this is how you learn, okay? Practicing mutual respect for qualities and experiences that are different from our own, okay? I grew up kind of in a single parent home, because my dad left when I was 10. But he was there, but he wasn't there. So sometimes we had money, sometimes we didn't have money. My mother's most embarrassing time was when we were receiving public assistance. Okay, for a brief time. And she worked like a dog, but she didn't work to make enough. And dad was dad. Okay, so she hated being looked down on. And that's what I'm saying about practicing mutual respect. Okay, experiences are different. Experiences are their own. You can't, as a writer, diminish someone's experience because it's not your own. But you can highlight it. You can expound on it. You can give them a voice as a writer. Okay. And that's one of the things I try to do when I talk about empowerment for women. That's one of the things I like to do is give all my characters a voice, give them all a voice that can be heard and understood, if that makes any sense. Understand that diversity includes not only ways of being, but also ways of knowing. And this is where I said that personal research that you do, the questions that you ask. I've been asked, why do you keep your hair short? Do you like it when people think that you're a boy? Okay. And honestly, the reason I keep my hair short is because I have big Puerto Rican hair and I don't know what to do with it. That's the biggest reason I keep my hair short. I like to roll out of bed and go, done. That's it. My daughter's the hairstylist, not me. I don't know what to do with this. I just cut my hair yesterday because I couldn't take it anymore. I was wearing a baseball cap all the time. And this is Orlando, where I live. It's hot down here. So we can't automatically assume that something is some way just because of what we see. Okay, we need to recognize that there are personal, cultural, institutionalized discrimination that creates and sustains privileges for some while creating and sustaining disadvantages for others. So the only way we can fix this or go forward as a team of writers who want to do more is joining together and understanding and asking those questions. One of the reasons why I love the Florida Writers Conference now is because it is a little bit more diverse. You know, the first time I attended, I was completely just humbled and I'm like, oh my God, I don't belong here. I do not belong here. There was no one that resembled me, looked like me, felt like me, nothing. And I don't know if there was someone like that, but I did not see anything like that. And that's what I'm talking about. I felt the lack of diversity, whether it was intended or not intended, just by being. Okay. And that's something that a lot of folks don't experience. So we need to understand that, because this whole thing of all are welcome, that is kind of what FWA is doing now, is all are welcome. Okay. So inclusion. So the diversity thing, yeah, all are welcome, but are we including everyone? All right. Are we actually practicing what we preach? So if you have a group and let's say there's 10 people, and I'm going to do the reverse, 10 people in your group and 8 of them are Black, 2 of them are white or Hispanic or whatever, or Asian. Okay. Are those 8 being inclusive of those 2? Or are we separating without realizing and being cliquey? That's really easy to see. It's very easy to see. And that's something that you don't want to happen. Okay. Now, does it happen that way? Of course it does. Of course it does. It happens in every culture, every creed, every ethnicity. We all do it. We all do it. So when I hear something, oh, that white lady over there, or this guy over here, that Black man, I hate that. I hate that because we all do it. We don't even realize that we do it. But the moment that you put a color or a creed or anything like that, in your language, you are denying this word. Completely denying it. Even in your writing, you're completely denying it. And we don't think about that enough. Okay. And I say this because the way I was brought up, I did think about it. And I have to consciously make sure that I don't do that. It's hard. It's hard. Okay. Because all those, in the fit of anger, all those initial biases, that's what bursts up. That's what you remember. That's what you think of. And it has nothing to do with that. We need to look more inwards than we do outwards. Okay. So inclusion is seen as a universal right. The aim of inclusion is to embrace all people, irrespective of race, gender, disability, medical, or other need. It's about giving equal access and opportunities and getting rid of discrimination and intolerance. In other words, get rid of those barriers. Okay. And it affects all aspects of public life. And it does. And we know this. We know this as a fact. Okay. Right now I work part-time at Disney, and we had a big blow up with a guest because one of our workers did not know that there was handicap accessible elevator for the monorail, and it blew up because Disney is all about assisting the guest. But it was one of those asides. Oh, I guess so. I don't think we do and stuff. We just have the ramp. Well, this person didn't bother to find out. This person did not care about the person in front of them. That's what I'm talking about. You have to give a darn. You really do. And if you don't personally give a darn, ask yourself why. There's a reason. Ask yourself why. So this one, I was trying to find a photo that would kind of demonstrate sensitivity, but it's more than sensitivity, it's cultural sensitivity. So does everyone know why Disney points with 2 fingers and not 1? No, right? So it's a cultural thing, because in a lot of cultures, doing this is almost seen as an FU. You don't point with 1 finger. You don't do that. So that's why Disney points with 2 or with the full hand. It's a way of being less insulting to the folks in front of you. And it's something that you don't consider. Okay. I took martial arts, and for me, it was Korean martial arts initially. And so I bowed. I learned to bow. I find myself still doing that when I'm introduced to folks. When I'm introduced to somebody at FWA, let's say at the conference, and I go to shake their hand, I shake their hand and I bow. They're like, why are you doing? I don't know. It's something that I appropriated, but it's a sign of respect that I was taught. And so that's what I do. But it's a matter of just understanding, when you have all these instances in the news where you see, teachers cutting off dreadlocks, the kids' dreadlocks, okay? Or insisting that a young woman takes off her hijab, her head wrap. No, that's being completely culturally insensitive. You're not considering what went into the thought and the process of them doing that. It's not an affront to us personally. It's a need for them, and we don't see that. So as writers, I think we have a unique way of seeing the world. And we have a unique way of representing what we do and giving voice to who we are and what we write. And whether you're doing a memoir, whether you're writing a dime store novel kind of thing, a mystery serial, whatever it is that you're doing, you have at your fingertips the ability to do something about it. Even if it's just a little bit. Even if it's just a little bit, you have the ability to do something about it. Okay? So, cultural sensitivity. Displaying cultural sensitivity means ensuring that your language avoids relying on unfounded assumptions or stereotypes of a given cultural group. We have a lot of them, not just worldwide, but here in America, here in the US, there are a lot of stereotypes and a lot of assumptions. And I I have them too. And I force myself to look it up to make sure that I'm either right or wrong, or, oh my God, I can't believe I'm being that insensitive in something I wrote. So the world is global. Like, it's not just here, it's everywhere. Okay. And we have to be conscious of that. We have to use terminology that doesn't offend. I moderated something on FWA the one day talking about sensitivity reads, and we will talk about that because they are important. They're important not just for the folks reading, but they're important for you and your authenticness as a writer. Okay. Because it shows that you cared. You cared enough to do something about it, to give voice to something that normally wouldn't have voice. Okay. So you don't want to be that person that writes, a story about slavery, okay, or a story about, the Tulsa massacre without ever interviewing or talking or reviewing or researching what happened to the descendants. Unless you're writing it solely from the perspective of the perpetrators, that's a different story. Okay? That's a completely different story. So little things like that. And I want you all to know that I try not to be offensive. So if at all I am, please tell me. Okay. But I know that we come from very different backgrounds. And so, but I have learned throughout my years that my background is not the only background. Okay? And I can learn from everyone around me. And I try. And the things that I don't know, I'll ask about. Because I want to know more. Okay. Moving to Florida was a huge education for me. Huge. So I'm from the Bronx via Scranton, then Northern Virginia, and now here. So it's big. Scranton was the biggest change. Scranton was something else entirely. And yes, it is like Dunder Mifflin. So what's a sensitivity reader? A sensitivity reader is not someone who is going to censor you, okay? A sensitivity reader is someone who reads for offensive content, misrepresentation, stereotypes, bias, lack of understanding, etc. They'll come in from nation or from the community that the author is writing about. So they'll include academic as well as personal experience in their reading. Usually this is a paid professional. Don't just ask a friend, hey, can you do a sensitivity read? Don't just ask your Native American friend, hey, can you read this and tell me if I'm being offensive to the Apaches or something? Don't do that. That's not what you want. Find someone within your genre that does sensitivity reads. Okay. Rates will vary. Turnaround time is dependent on word count. Okay. This is a paid professional. It's not just a friend. It should never just be a friend. Okay. So let's talk about some of the controversies. So does everyone know what this book is about? American Dirt, for the most part? Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
I wrote this book called 2020, and one of the characters is a racist, and he used insensitive language, which I had one reviewer did say, oh, there's gratuitous offensive language. He used the N-word and some other choice words, and I felt as though, oh, okay, I have a diverse cast of characters in this book, and I think that it was okay. It's okay in that circumstance to, if you have a character who is a racist, for him to use racist terminology that some people would, they're going to be offended by it, and if they aren't, then it's not working. Then I need to get that character to say even more outrageous things. I was
No,
wondering
I
what's
agree.
on that.
I agree. So this is one of those, that's why I said the sensitivity part of it, doing sensitivity reads, you really have to find someone who has done this. Because if there is any book that you write that has even the littlest bit of controversial language or controversial representation, you're gonna have the naysayers. You're gonna have the people that are gonna give you a star. You're gonna have all of this. But here's the thing, if you are being true to your character and not just throwing it in there just for the sake of throwing it in, if your character, the character that you created, is that racist individual from the get-go, then it's unreasonable to assume that he would never say that. Because obviously he would. Does that make sense? So
Yes, that's the way that I felt. So
exactly. So you're going to have those folks that will say, well, you shouldn't have that in the book. Well, and you can respond and say, of course I shouldn't. But this is who that character is. It's not about gratuitous. Some now see that the N word and this and that, they see it as this trigger. And I understand the basis of it, but my background is actually a little different when you think about it, because I'm not from the South or anything. I'm from the Bronx. Okay. And in the inner city, growing up, that N word was not used in a derogatory way necessarily, depending on who said it.
right.
It was used as a term of endearment. Yo, my nigga, like that. So, and I still have a friend who lives here, and he will text me. He goes, and he says, pardon, my nigga, how you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine.
Are you old enough to know Richard Pryor, who that
Oh,
is?
of course, yeah.
Because I think he's probably the first one that started using the
Exactly.
N word, and he can say it because
Because he's Black. And so it's a fine line. If you don't have pigmentation, people tell you that you cannot use that word. But if that is who your character is, don't divert from that. Stay true to that. But then there's a consistency factor. Unless he has some epiphany, he's always going to be that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Have you read Huckleberry Finn, or about?
Oh yeah. That's one of the banned books. We're going to be
I
talking about
remember
that.
he caught holy hell because he used the word nigger like 200 and something times. I used it once in my book. I caught a little flack.
But that's
But
what
I
people
recall
are
him saying that he thought it was great because he sold a whole lot more books because he used that language, but the language was authentic. This, that's as far as I know. I didn't live back.
Well, and see, and that's where some of these controversies come up, because it's that balancing act. Sometimes we go overboard the one way, So I'll use another Disney one, Song of the South. That's you can't even find that anymore.
Yeah, they had to pull that, didn't they?
Yeah, they pulled it. So this is what I'm talking about. But stick to your guns. I always recommend have someone read it, because someone who is of that either nationality or whatever, someone who is your target reader and or who the intended person is that's receiving that would be a good one to read it and tell you, yeah, that sounds about right. Or
well,
I don't know if in this instance they would say that.
Most of the people I know are old white people. So that
Well, now you know me.
Now I know you. Will you? Oh, you can review some things. Well, let me ask you another question. I don't mean to take up all your.
No, that's fine.
This thing about authentic voices it kind of bothers me. And my sister's she writes children's books. And she's a white woman, and she's coming out with a book about the internment camps, and it's a children's book for the perspective of a child who was in the Japanese internment camps. And it's a really great book, and she kept it like this, even though it won an award for like 10 years because she was afraid, she was told, oh, you don't have an authentic voice because you're not Japanese American, even though she is married to a Japanese American person and her kids are all Japanese American, you know, and they're beautiful, by the way. And so she's deathly afraid of that. And I feel as though that we've gone a little too far. I think of it as creative segregation. And then
Exactly. And that's why I'm saying it's a
and
fine line.
putting it on in the other way, Laura. I mean, are you confined to your lane? You can only write about
No.
people
You're never
that
confined.
No.
That's what the whole purpose of this is. You are never confined to your lane as long as you can own the fact that it's not your lane. What some folks do, though, is they misrepresent how it is that they're putting this book out. I'll give you an example. This American Dirt, it's on your screen. Okay, American Dirt, written by Janine Cummins, is the story of a a migrant woman coming across illegally, and it's basically about the migrant experience. And she may not necessarily have been the one to write this because she didn't own what she knew. And I'm going to say it this way. When she was pinned down on the fact that this isn't authentic, how can you write from the migrant experience without having experienced it or without interviewing or whatever? And it's a great story. Don't get me wrong. It's a great story. But she pipes up as a defense, well, my husband is an immigrant. Well, her husband's Irish. Nobody blinks an eye when you come through the airport. He can come through the airport. Someone that's brown cannot, unless they're coming from one of the same. You see what I'm saying? So
Sure.
she dug herself a little hole in there. But the issue, one of the reasons that this was such a controversy is because it was selected by Oprah's book club. So it was a huge seller, even though the publicists and everything else tamped it down when all of the stuff started coming in about whether it was authentic or not. Okay, and this was 2 years ago.
But did she do her research? I mean, did she
Did the research.
dig down?
She did the research, but she didn't own it. This is what I'm trying to say. She did not own it the way she needed to. She did not do the disclaimer. This is a story of this. This is not my story. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, is she a Black woman? Is that her?
No,
But
she's a white woman.
a white woman. Okay, so she needed to come forward and say, "Hey, I'm a white woman.
No, she's
I
a
know
white
what I'm
woman.
talking about." Is it?
But
Is this,
wait,
is
but
it-
wait, let me continue, because what ended up happening is Oprah kind of backed away a little bit. You know, everybody kind of backed away from the story. It's still available. You can still buy it. It's still a decent seller. Okay. And then just a few days ago, Oprah came out again. That's the bottom right picture. She defends keeping American Dirt in her book club after the controversy. She really loved the book. Now, here is what I throw back to you all. Okay. What I throw back to you all is that's well and fine that she loved the book. Nobody says that the book it's a bad book. But the ownership the authenticity of it is what was in question. And when you have someone like Oprah, who even slightly gives a nod to that, it's reinforced exponentially. It's not like if I say, yeah, man, this was a great book. Nobody's gonna listen to me. Maybe two people are gonna listen to me about that book. But Oprah says it, all of a sudden it brings it back into the limelight.
Well, have you read the book?
I read parts of it, and it's a good book. It is. What I read was good, but I understand the controversy. There's a difference. Those are two separate things. The value and how good the book is has nothing to do with the controversy behind it.
Did she put something in there like an author's note or introduction or some? Is that part of her problem? She should have said something like, "Hey, I'm a white lady. but I know
No,
what
I
I'm
think-
talking about.
I think that was added afterwards, after the controversy. So, but you can look up all the controversy about this. It's readily available. Like literally type in google.com, American Dirt Controversy, and you'll see everything come up. But what I'm saying is, again, it's about ownership. So this is a white woman who wrote about the migrant experience and passed off her authenticity as, oh, my husband is an immigrant. But he's from Ireland. Okay. I can say my mother was an immigrant, and she was. My mother was a naturalized citizen. She didn't rely on the fact that she married my Puerto Rican father to get her citizenship. She did it the right way. She paid all her money. She did all of this, you know. She had to take the test. She had to do all of that. Okay. My aunt came over from Peru and was illegal for 15 years and refused to do it the right way, even though my mother tried to sponsor her, refused. So we were always looking over our shoulders. We didn't know who was going to knock on the door. That is a completely different experience from, oh, my husband's from Ireland. They never once, I'm sure, looked over their shoulder. It is a
I think
lived
Denise has a
experience.
question.
Yes.
Denise, you have a question?
Oh, there you are.
Hi, yes, thanks. I'm going on a different topic. Is that okay with
Of
these
course, of
gentlemen
course.
and Laura? So Laura, thanks so much for your presentation. I'm really, really enjoying it and grateful for your expertise. So I have a question about a book manuscript that I wrote that won the gold prize in the RIPLA in 2020. And it's a discussion, it's an exploration, nonfiction, about learning about my Trinidad family and the reasons why my family passed for white in the US. And so I'm working right now actively on trying to get it published. And I wrote it very specifically with the idea to share personal experience in the hopes of promoting conversation in not just in the US, but internationally, because Trinidadians are all over the world. So one of the things I'm running into, my uncle's been very much my advisor and collaborator, my Trinidad uncle, in helping me sort this through. And there's very different ways of referring to race in other countries. So here we tend to say black, white, and, you know, and black is the latest publishing convention is black is capital B and white is small letter W. And in my book, I really, in Trinidad, people don't refer to people commonly like that. They will say, oh, that person with the coffee complexion, or this, that, or it's much more descriptive and authentic in a different way, in a Caribbean outlook of how people look at things. And so I'm thinking about, what do I want to do? At the moment, I have my manuscript with both lowercase whenever I refer to the terms black, white, because it felt more in harmony with the worldview that I have now, that would actually rather not use just those two categories. They're so, I don't know what the word is, it's either or. And my worldview has really changed to be very much a continuum. And my family is like that. My family's not either or, we're a continuum of skin complexion. So I was thinking about putting a disclaimer at the beginning of the book that I use the terms black and white because that's the US convention. And in this book, I capitalize both, or I lowercase both. Not meaning any disrespect, but just reflecting more of the cultural point of view I've come to embrace. And I didn't know if people do that or not. And I was just trying to think about that for when I do have that conversation, hopefully someday with a publisher, that I'll be prepared and that I'll know how to say it in a way that would be acceptable from that point of view.
Again, you're owning it though. And that's the best part, is that you are owning it. Putting in a disclaimer, it will ultimately be the decision of the publisher, whether you decide to go traditionally or independent,
Mhm.
a disclaimer is a good thing.
Okay.
Because it's almost like putting the adult 17 and older little
Mhm.
thing. So
Yeah.
you've been forewarned. You know now that this is what's going to be in there. Don't get all upset. Don't get all hot and bothered and stuff. If you see something that you don't agree with, the disclaimer was at the beginning.
Okay, the disclaimer. at the beginning.
Yeah, so that's not a problem. So again, it'll be ultimately the decision of your publisher,
Mhm.
however you decide to go. But in terms of your manuscript, you can actually put it like that. I know a lot of publishers like Macmillan and stuff, they will, regardless, because of so many issues, they will send it to a sensitivity reader. They will
Uh-huh.
find someone who fits and they'll send it to them to kind of go through it. And to see even if the disclaimer works, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
If that's the appropriate disclaimer to put at the beginning. But yeah. So that's like me. If I were ever to write from my perspective, let's say, remember I said my mother was racist. She was. So for her, Chola, which is a native person from Peru, she didn't mean that in a good way. She meant it in a derogatory way. Okay. Or she would say stuff like cara de papa. Cara de papa is potato face. That it's completely insulting. And it's one of those, but that's how she would speak it. And that's how a lot of them speak. The older folks, not the younger folks, the older folks.
Mhm.
And that's how they still speak. So it's one of those, if I were writing a story that way, I would have to put a disclaimer in there for them to understand that please know that this is from this time frame and these people and stuff, and this is how they would refer, because it is. You can't get around that. So yeah.
Thank you. That's
Of course.
really helpful because I've been on the fence about it and I haven't been able to find other examples. And so I really appreciate
Disclaimers
it.
are a good thing. So like, you all know the story, the Hate You Give
Mhm.
by Angie Thomas. Okay. You know what that means, right? The hate you give, it's thug life. THUG. The hate you
Oh,
give.
no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what it's thug, because it's the equivalent of what the young man was considered without anyone ever knowing that that's whether he was or wasn't. The hate you
Mm,
give. That's why it's a you instead of the you.
Interesting.
Okay. So there are ways to present things that are eye-opening and clarifying before you ever open the book. Before you ever open a book. Like this title right here,
Yeah.
American Dirt.
Hmm.
I mean, the dirty brown people, that's, you're not considered. My mother was the biggest patriot. I cannot even tell you. If I ever spoke badly about the US, I got ripped into. Ever. And I was born here. I have the right. I served in the military, but she was like, no, esta es América. Así no se habla. You don't speak that way. And I'm like, all right. It's like, okay, ma, calm down. Okay. Things like the Colin Kaepernick thing blew her mind. And we ended up having a 2 days worth discussion about the whys and wherefores and all of that. And she ended up not believing anything I said. I had to look up videos of like Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah and Queen Latifah and all, like the people that she liked, to understand why Colin Kaepernick was doing what he was doing. And that it wasn't necessarily a disrespect as much as I understand, but this does not represent me. Like that kind of thing. So, there are ways to present it. Disclaimers are good. Again, it's ultimately up to your publisher. Again, whether you go traditional or independent, what kind of a disclaimer you put in there.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's really
course.
helpful.
Of course. So, and as I was saying, like, Oprah, I love Oprah. Don't get me wrong, but there's weight to her words. You know, there is a disproportionate weight to her words. And really loving the book, there are a lot of books I love that are so bad, like so bad in today's day, you know, like, I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite books. And the N word is all over there. You know, it's like, it just is. So, but I love that book. And yet it's a banned book in a lot of places. So it's, there's always going to be controversy. It's just a matter of, if it's not your voice, how can you get it as close to authentic as possible? How can you make it value laden so that it's not an affront and it's more of, I need to know more. I want to know more. Okay. I'm inviting commentary because that's okay too. Invite commentary. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So I am going to go here. So the next Oprah's book club recommendation is Finding Me by Viola Davis. And I was struck by this quote from the book. Because this applies to being Hispanic, being Latino in the inner city. There is an emotional abandonment that comes with poverty and being, for her, Black. You just believe you're the leftovers. A lot of folks don't understand how that feels. Remember I said, anytime I go into any of these writing things, I am the only me there is, depending on where I go. And I feel it. Okay. And I try not to let it affect how I am or who I am. Okay. I always just try to be me. But I'm conscious of the words that I use, uber conscious of the words that I use and how I present myself. Okay. I can be street if I need to be. I can be very cultured and civilized if I need to be. I can be very Puerto Rican. I can be very Peruvian. I can even be Central American if I need to. These are all differences. Okay. And with my one friend, like I said, I'm his nigga, and it's Nigga. It's like, yo, it's like, so unless you are from that background, you can't understand unless you talk to someone. And be honest in what you discuss. Be okay with feeling guilty. Because that's one of the things that I think stifles conversation. Because just like she says, here you believe you're the leftovers. For those of us, and I will include myself, those of us who are lighter skinned, and who can present a little bit differently when we need to, we don't necessarily have to feel that way, but they do very often. So there's a difference. There's a difference, and you don't even realize it. I will tell you this: the only place I grew up in the South Bronx. Okay, the shadow of Yankee Stadium, basically. But the only white people I knew, except for when I lived right by Yonkers, were my teachers. I didn't have neighbors that were white. I had neighbors that were white Latinos, Black Latinos. Okay. But I didn't know American culture really growing up, except for what I learned in school. And that's kind of what I'm saying, because when you leave school and you come back home, you are the other again. And that's why I say, if you are writing from other voices, own voices, you need to talk to someone from that background. You have to. Even if it's just cursory, you have to, in order to kind of get that understanding, in order to make it as authentic as you can for a writer. So,
Laura,
yes.
I don't understand.
Where are you?
I'm up here.
Yeah, there you are.
I don't understand that. I'm trying to empathize, which I think is what you're calling for here. um, there is an emotional abandonment that comes with poverty and being Black. Who is a person that feels emotionally abandoned? Who is abandoning?
Society, you're not included.
So
You're
you
not
feel
part of you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
you're saying that I feel you have emotionally abandoned on an emotional level.
No, there's an emotional abandonment that comes with poverty and being Black. When you are, so we used to have a joke growing up, okay? When we weren't poor, we were po.
Oh.
P-O. We were so po, we couldn't afford the O and the R at the end,
Yeah,
okay? Okay, you laugh, right? But some folks don't get that. And it's like, no, seriously, like that's how, when you eat rice and an egg every day for 10 days, because there's no money, that's it. You have one meal a day. And what the school gives you for breakfast, like you don't matter.
Yeah.
Because no one is there for you. You see your parents working and killing themselves, and still there's nothing there. There's nothing there for you. Okay, you're not that you're forgotten, but you're a leftover. And it's like, yeah, I'll get to it. Yeah, we'll get to it. When the South Bronx burned in the 70s, there's a reason it burned in the 70s. It burned because the leftovers got tired and they decided to fire everything up. Like, that's why. So that's why I'm like, this quote, just this quote alone makes me want to read this book. Just this quote alone.
That I was in Miami during the riots there, and that was a big thing. Is the police department just cordoned off their place, and then the white folks basically looking, hey, look, they're burning down their own
Exactly.
their own place.
And that's what happened. And that's what happened in the South Bronx. And that's what happens kind of in a lot of places. There's an abandonment. There's a physical abandonment, but just being poor and other, there's also an emotional abandonment, because where do you belong? That's the question, is where do you belong and when? Like, how long will it take for me to belong? That's the issue. So it's, I've had this conversation with different writing friends and stuff. And it's like, and my one friend who's Black, and she's, she's great writer and everything, but she feels it too, but we feel it differently. So she actually said that when she walks into a book conference or something, she feels that otherness. And I said, yeah, it's apparent, the color of your skin. And she goes, yeah. And then she looked at me and she's like, but you do too, right? I said, well, yeah, I don't present very feminine. So right there's a flag for people. Some folks see the Hispanic, some folks don't. It's not like I flaunt it, but you immediately know that there's a difference. Okay. So, and we're both women. So, it's one of those otherness things that you start piling it up. And I would always recommend in groups, whenever you guys decide to come back together again, there's actually a little social studies, social experiment that you do. You start asking questions, you have everybody in a line. I don't know if any of you have ever done it. You put everybody in a line, straight line, and you say, okay, if you come from a one-parent household, take a step back. If you had more than one car while you were growing up, take a step forward. And you have different questions that are based on socioeconomic factors, and at times some religious factors. Anytime I have ever done that, I'm at the back of the room. Okay, with maybe a 2 or 3 other people, and everyone else is up front. That's a visual expression of the differences that we don't realize are there until we ask the questions. And that's why I'm saying, as writers, ask the questions. They may not be the questions, the answers that you want to hear, but they may be the answers that you need to hear. Again, I don't judge. I don't tell someone you can't write this. What I do is say, if you're going to write this, be sure that you do this. I will never tell someone you cannot write what you are feeling, because those are your words. Now, there are other folks that will say, no, you can't write that. I don't believe in that. I don't. Because it's not fair to you. It's not fair. It's not inclusive. It's not.
Well, if you're writing what you're feeling and it's bleeped up, then maybe
exactly,
someone like your therapist should tell you.
There you go. So I will say I write predominantly female, but I write hetero as well. I have a paranormal series where, there's one little couple in there that's female, but everyone else is hetero. And there was one story I was writing that literally I had in my mind, my character was gay. And she met the guy at the hotel, made a left turn, fell in love with him. I'm like, well, okay. So, that doesn't reflect me, but it's like, okay, no problem. So you have to feel what you're writing. And if there's a question about something, ask the questions. That's what I'm saying. Ask the questions, because you don't want to be that person that gets attacked for no reason. So these are, I went backwards. I went forwards rather. So these are banned and challenged books from 2013 to 2020. This is just 2020 and 2019. And this is actually the little guide, the reason. Okay. So you have things like discusses suicide. Remember I said about the disclaimer. You can do that. Put a disclaimer. Transgender character, unsuited for age group, promote Christianity, nudity, racism, violence, poorly written. I don't know why that one's there. LGBTQIA content, religious viewpoint, corrupts youth. Like, we will ban books now for anything, which is sad, because that's how we learn. That's how we learn who we are as human beings. Okay. There's To Kill a Mockingbird. There's The Hate U Give. Remember I said thug, THUG. It's about thug life. Okay. All American Boys. Let's see what's here on this one. Oh, Handmaid's Tale. How apropos right now, but Handmaid's Tale. Harry Potter. Okay. And over here, John Steinbeck, Of Mice and Men, is a banned book because it's anti-family. Okay. So banning books is subjective, not objective at all. Just like writing is subjective. You're going to write what you're going to write. Plain and simple. And you have the right to put out there what you need to put out. But what I recommend in terms of sensitivity, diversity, and inclusion is keep those words in mind. What are you writing about and why? Why is it your story to tell? You have to ask yourself that. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, is it your story to tell? We don't like to do that with ourselves. We don't like to present that way. Okay. So when you're doing this, when you're writing and you're getting ready and you have this whole story in your head and you know exactly what it is that you want to put out. It's a memoir, or it's this, or something you heard from your grandparents, or that. Ask yourself, are you writing from lived experience? Just a question. It's not an attack. It's just one of those, ask yourself. Okay, and then ask yourself, can you portray what you're writing about without being willfully or unconsciously biased or exploitive? And this goes back to using the N word. Okay, it's not gratuitous if it's part of the character's persona and they finally dropped it in the story. That's not being gratuitous. Gratuitous is if every other flipping word is that word, then it's gratuitous. Okay, are you the correct person to write this? Now, that one has gotten me into arguments. Okay, it's not necessarily just whether you are the correct person to write this, is should you be writing this alone? Should you be getting assistance? Should you have input from others? Okay, because that's important. Ma'am, you have input from your uncle, you know, so you have that, and you have those references that you can put in. Okay, and if you are the right person, do you have someone identified to read it who is not a friend? And I say that again, not a friend. Because a friend usually will be just fine with blowing cherries up your butt, and they will smile and say, yes, no, that's great, it's not a without ever really telling you the truth. Okay, the sensitivity reader usually will tell you the truth. And again, it's not to censor. All right, sensitivity, inclusion, all of that, it's not about censoring. Okay, it's about authenticity. Okay, as authentic as you can as a writer. All right, and why does it matter? So give me all the books. There was a time I could not go anywhere without a book in hand. Okay, in high school, I was on the softball field, riding the bench, reading a book, because I read everywhere, anywhere and everywhere I could read. And my favorites growing up, besides my comic books, was Nancy Drew. You can't get any whiter than Nancy Drew. Okay? I was like, what is strawberry blonde hair? I had no idea. Okay. And why was the one girl's name George? Like, Beth? What's a Beth? You know, like I did not recognize any of those names except Nancy. Okay. So, and what was the maid's name? Hannah Gruen. I still remember that. Okay. I had the whole set. I read all of them. But you know which one was the first one I read? The only one I identified with. Number 44, the clue in the crossword cipher. Why? Because she goes to Peru. That was the first Nancy Drew book I read. And reading it now is not the best thing because you can see, but as a kid, I didn't see any of that. But now when I read it, I'm like, oh, that's so offensive. Oh my gosh. It's like, you know, so you read it now and it's, oh, goodness gracious. But that could not be published right now. Not the way it's presented. Do you see what I mean? Like societal changes drive societal changes. Okay. Verbiage matters. And I know that they weren't trying to be offensive. They were just writing the story, but the story was written when, you know, it's a sign of the times, just like it is now. Okay. But that was the first book. I always remember number 44. Clue in the crossword cipher. It taught me about the Nazca lines and Machu Picchu and all that other stuff. So I loved it. Okay. So why do you need a sensitivity read? When a writer writes about an identity or community they don't have experience with, the feedback they receive from someone who has lived experience or firsthand knowledge of that identity can be invaluable in strengthening the story. Again, it's not about censorship. It is not about censorship. That is the first thing I always get is like, I don't need a sensitivity reader. I don't want anybody telling me what I can't write. That's not what it's about. And if you find someone who does that, they're not the one for you. Okay, they are not, right? Sensitivity, or I like to call them authenticity reads. Okay, they analyze the story's plot, characterization, setting, and dialogue. Okay, it's really important when the identity being written about is a marginalized one. An authenticity reader is like a beta reader who looks at the story through a specific lens. And if you go traditional publishing, most editors will recommend a sensitivity reader, an authenticity reader, depending on the subject matter. You can't get away from it if you're going to go traditionally published. Okay, you really can't, depending on what you're writing about. All right. Now, why is this important? It's important because there's more than just one color out there. There's more than one just ethnicity. There's more than just one culture. There's more than what you see in the mirror. And we all have to acknowledge that. We do. Okay? We have to acknowledge that. I'm Peruvian. I always consider myself PPRA, Peruvian, Puerto Rican, American. Okay? I'm always American because I was born here, but my heritage is important to me. So it's Peruvian, Puerto Rican. Okay? So that's super important. The LGBT stuff, that's important to me too. Sometimes we get a little crazy. That's not me. So I'm just, you love who you love. No judgment. You love who you love. That's it. And that's kind of how my mother saw it too, when she finally understood what that was about. Is just, you love who you love. You can't choose that. It chooses you. Okay. So you want to try to be as inclusive as you can, even in, let's say you're not writing, you're just doing research, you're going to all these conferences, you're networking, and you see, a young Black girl sitting at the table by herself at I'll use the FWA conference as an example. People are milling about, everybody's in little groups, and then you see the one or two, people of color kind of separate. It's their first con. What do? Do you leave them be? Do you go over and introduce yourself and try to include them in something? Because I guarantee you, they already feel excluded, even though they paid to be there. They feel excluded. What is your role? I say, as a writer, our role is always to include everyone. And if we can reach out to one person who is not what we see in the mirror and include them either in conversation or what we're doing, we'll just make this place better. We just will. Okay. The FWA conference is a great place to do that. It's a great place to do that. Because now it is more inclusive. Now there are different shades going there. And I say different shades because you just don't know. You don't know a person's background. Thank God for Ancestry.com, because we know a lot about our backgrounds, but what do you really know about the person in front of you? You don't. So be inclusive. Try to get those folks to come in with you. So what's a sensitivity read? A read or edit of work. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Yes, I had a question, Laura. It's Denise.
Yep.
At some point, and it doesn't have to be right now, because I want to hear what you were going to say next, can you just address the use of pronouns?
Yes,
group?
ma'am.
Because we customarily don't do that in this group, but I'm a member of some groups up in the north and other states where it's quite customary. And I understand its point about solidarity, but I am confused about how to discern what to put out there and the background to it. So if you could educate us a little bit about that,
I
that
will
would be
actually,
great.
thank you. And so you see that my name says Ellie Perez and then Laura. I almost put she, her, they, them. I almost did that, and I didn't because I didn't want to muddy the waters too much, but I'll touch on that because that is a big thing right now, is the whole, he, him, all that gender identity within the pronouns. So folks get really into an uproar about that, and there's an ownership is in it. So it's right along the lines of, and I won't say back in the day because it still happens, of being called, well, Ms. Perez. No, it's Mrs. Perez. It's that feeling. It's that same thing. It's that this is who I am. This is my identity. So if my identity is she, don't call me a he. If my identity is he, don't call me a she. And if I kind of can identify either way, then I'm gonna go they, them. All right. So, but here's the issue. We have, and I and I hate to dump on the younger folks, but again, it's those extremes. Okay, remember how I say we go all the way extreme one way, all the way extreme another way to try to compensate. We're very reactionary. Okay. And so when it comes to that, if someone puts in their designation, be respectful and use it. Okay. I had to interview someone for my podcast, and I always ask, how do you want to be addressed? Now, I've known this person for years. Okay. And they just recently started identifying as they, them. Totally threw me. So I apologized from the get-go and said, I'm going to screw that up. I said, I'm sorry in advance if I do that. I will try to remember it's they, them. Okay. It's natural. Okay. It's more about acknowledgement than it is about rock hard in stone stuff. But if you see on my name there and it says, she, her, then refer to me as female, even though appearance wise with the hair, I might look like a guy. Okay. Hair does not a person make, neither do clothes. Okay. But because of that, that's why the identifiers are out there now. The identifiers are out there to specifically identify your gender. That's why they've been fighting in different states and stuff about taking off the sex on a birth certificate. They want to just leave it gender neutral. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if I specifically agree with that, but I get it. I understand why they're doing it. But again, it's a reactionary thing. It's a reactionary thing to being that non-binary. Okay. And they, them is non-binary. That means you cannot pigeonhole me as a she or a he. It's a they, them. So when you write, it's the same thing. You can refer to folks in your writing as they, them, and kind of leave it as a secret whether or not they're a he or a she, or if they're non-binary. I've done that without realizing I did it. And when I went back and examined it, I was like, oh, snap, I didn't realize I did that. Okay. But I instinctively write they, them, because I don't always know what sex my character when I start. But it's really just about identifying. It's about pigeonholing. You don't do that. It's, again, the easiest way to equate it is that whole Mrs. I mean, Bill doesn't want to be Mrs. Platt. Okay, that's not who he is. It's Mr. Platt. Okay? And maybe I'm Ms. Perez, not Mrs. Perez, which I am. I'm Ms. Okay. And it's why Mrs.? Again, it goes back to the old norms. What is the role of a Mrs.? It's ownership. Females are the only ones with multiple designations to identify where we are in our lives or who it is that we are attached or not attached to. If you think about it, it's Ms., Miss, Mrs. Why? I'm just Laura. I'm Laura Perez. Okay, he's Bill Platt. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So am I a she? Am I identifying as she? If I am self-identifying, then yes, I'm self-identifying as she. And I expect you to respect that. Unfortunately, we don't all come with a card that says they, them, he, he, her, he, him. he, she, he, whatever. Like, we don't have that. So all we can do is do it in conversation and or within our groups. But once somebody has identified that way, be respectful of that, because that's really what it is. They are seeking your respect in how they identify. That's what the whole thing is about. It's about respect. You acknowledging their gender identity, whatever it may be, whether you agree with it or not. If you don't believe in non-binary, doesn't matter. They do. It's not about you. It's about them. And that's where that sensitivity comes in. Okay? That inclusiveness comes in. You still have to be inclusive of those folks. That's why there are a lot of names now that are gender neutral. Okay? We have a lot of gender neutral names. All right. My one character, Sydney, can be male or female. Okay. Can be Sid. I have someone else, Alexandra, but nobody calls her Alexandra. It's Alex. So you don't know if it's a male or female. And that's the whole point. There's a gender neutrality that's kind of running rampant right now, at least here in the US. It's not something everybody agrees with, but it's not about you, it's about them. And they're asking for the respect that you would give to a Mr. or a Mrs. or a Ms. or a Miss. Okay? They're asking for the same thing, the same consideration. Okay. And if they've corrected you once, they don't expect to have to correct you again, most folks. So I don't know if that answered your question, if you want to know a little bit more.
No, it definitely answered my question. It made me think that the situations where I've encountered it the most have been on Zoom. So like you put Laura next to your name, and I've been on Zooms where people put their pronouns in their name.
Yeah.
And so actually going to more on Zoom gives you both an opportunity to know more about a person's preferences, but
Yeah.
only if you know how to use it properly. And that was my confusion about it.
And that's why I did the thing about Mrs. and Mr. because it's exactly the same thing. It's the same premise, only our minds aren't really set up to think about it that way because we're only thinking male, female.
Right.
So, and it's a construct of identity that is necessary for some folks. Again, as long as you don't call me late for dinner, I don't care what you call me. But again, I'm older. So it's a lot of the younger folks that really struggle with figuring out who they are. And a lot of that comes from there. So, but again, like I said, it's a respect thing. I wouldn't call, Bill, Mrs. Platt, I would either say, Mr. Platt, or I would call him Bill if he's okay with me calling him by his first name. You would always ask, same thing. But like I said, when I put the Laura in there, I was like, do I put I was like, no, because this was already a lot. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that, but yes, I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. That's a really educational answer. I appreciate it a lot.
Not a problem. And that's actually one of the things that's included in the sensitivity thing: gender and gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, culture. And I put in here culture of specific groups. Star Wars fans are fans unto themselves. Star Trek fans are fans unto themselves. Do not confuse the two because you will have a fight break out. So just don't do it, but even military, if you're writing, a drama, that takes place on a military base or, a point of war, I hope you've talked to someone who's been in the service, don't just make it up. Talk to someone. So it's not just about race and ethnicity, it's about backgrounds, you want to know what you need to know to write the story well, and they're like a beta reader who looks at the story through a specific lens, the lens that you're requesting. That's why I said you got to shop around sometimes. So let's see. Sensitivity readers should never, listen carefully, never insist that you change what you wrote. Nope. Should never insist that you change your opinion. They should never censor what you need to say or censure you. They should never rewrite your words, and they should never collude. Just agree with you for the sake of agreeing. Honesty and frankness from a sensitivity, authenticity reader is important. Okay. It's not offensive. You're not looking to be offended. You just want the truth. And the truth may or may not hurt. And they may tell you, you know what, you should not be writing this, you know, and if they do, which I doubt someone would do, but it's more of just fixing some stuff. Okay. So as writers, we have a lot of freedom to do a lot of things that other folks don't. And we have, you know, that little role sometimes to even educate if we want. Okay?
Laura, I have a question.
Sure.
Obviously, now that we're friends, you can't read my manuscript.
We ain't friends. I just you.
But if we weren't such good friends.
No, if
this-
we were good friends, I would tell you, I would send you to someone else. Yeah.
Okay.
Like if I
Okay.
knew you personally, I would not read I would
Right,
I would
well,
read it
this-
for pleasure. I would not read it as a sensitivity read. No.
This book is about it involves indigenous peoples,
Mhm.
and this particular community has been wiped out. They're gone. But would you be able to read that? Not
Well,
having and on this, for sensitivity reasons, not being.
So I have more indigenous than my family would like to admit. Because again, the prejudices, remember that little triangle thing I talked about? Yeah, turns out my mom wanted to be up here, but she wasn't up here. She was down here with the indigenous, okay? And so was dad. So yeah, it's been interesting doing all the ancestry.com and doing all the family tree stuff. It's been enlightening, to say the least. But yeah, I could probably take a look at it, and if not, refer you to someone who has a better background. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't ever review something that I cannot review. I don't do that. But just remember, a good reader is going to provide clear and concise feedback. They're going to make appropriate suggestions regarding any changes, be constructive, not destructive, never make assumptions. They're going to add to the manuscript and not detract or change. They'll be specific to what's being asked. And I'm going to show you real quick an actual completed one. So this was one that I had done. The background is the person is a psychologist, writing psychologist. They're writing a story, takes place, it's a murder mystery thing. They're in a jail. There's a lot of Latino background, LGBT, trans, all of that. And so these are just some of the things that I pointed out. And I started with, overall, the feel and read of this manuscript does try to consider the subject matter and different backgrounds. Certain specific concerns were noted and are listed below. And I listed them by page so that they knew exactly what I was talking about. I said you should avoid any physical descriptions that use food. It's viewed as demeaning and derogatory in describing individuals. Description of the one person having café con leche colored skin. And then continued on page 97 as eyes swirled with butterscotch. Okay. Yeah, you can't say there's a color of dark chocolate anymore. Okay. It's a problem for me because I used to do that too, but now that's a big no. You don't with food. You don't do that, you know? You just don't. So this is a link, and what I'll do is I'll provide this to the group as well. I'll email this if you want this PowerPoint. Okay. This is a link for words that describe skin tone. Okay. That do not involve food. So,
Can you put it in the chat? Maybe you can put it in the chat.
oh yeah, I probably could. Hold on. Let me see. I'll figure it out. I'll put it on there. And then let's say, oh, here, using the term Fu Manchu to describe a mustache is viewed as a negative portrayal of the Asian community and is also a dated commentary. Okay, I'd recommend you use more descriptive words to describe the style. We all know what Fu Manchu means. Fu Manchu mustache. Okay, we don't do that anymore. we don't do that anymore. So, and then the one character, the trans character's description of her neighborhood. Latinx is a term imposed on folks of Spanish descent. Folks to try to encompass label folks of Spanish descent under one label of conformity. The recommendation would be to use the term Latin, Latino, or Spanish neighborhood. Someone of their background, this person is Puerto Rican background, would not use the term Latinx. Yeah, I come from a Latinx background. No, they would never do that. And then your description of the use of the Spanish language by Puerto Ricans. This is a quote from that character. So Spanish, or what passes for it from the mouths of Puerto Ricans, you know, rolling R's that sound like L's, V's exchanged for B's, subtle nuances that make our dialect so beautiful. So I read this twice, super insulted, okay? Super insulted. And I said, while the final words in that sentence attempt to soften the impact, it is difficult to believe any Puerto Rican would demean their language in this way. The assumption made is Puerto Ricans do not speak Spanish. This is incorrect. And while there are words that are dialectical in nature, the pronunciation of the words is individual and not inherent to a people. Okay? I try to be really clear and concise, and most sensitivity readers will do the same. Okay? And then I just put all sensitivity reads are recommendations, suggestions, and I appreciate the trust you've placed in me reading your manuscript. Okay? But this right here, I'll be honest, I gave it to my wife to read. She's pure Puerto Rican. Boy, she was PO'd when she read that. Because I thought, is it just me taking offense to it? No, 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 you don't do that. Okay. Yes, they do that, but you don't refer to it that way. What passes for Spanish from the mouths of Puerto Ricans? No, we would never say that. Okay. So it was, yeah, that was very interesting, actually. Hold on. I'm trying to move you guys here. Okay, I can't move the screen. Nope, I'm done. All right, so one way to find folks is by referral. Usually your writers groups, you should have someone that you can refer to and they can further refer you. Local library, local state writing groups, internet. Writingdiversely.com is a good site. Readsy.com will often have some sensitivity readers and or a site that you can utilize. So, and I threw American Dirt out there again because it has created such a ruckus. So just remember, when you do find someone, if you find someone, you know, you have the right to ask them questions, not just them asking you. So ask them what their background is, what kind of reads do they do? One person does not do all of it. Okay, there are specific things that readers will do. Okay, because everybody has a different background, a different voice. Ask them what time they charge, how much they charge, how long they've been doing it. Are there any reads they won't do? Okay, there are some reads that people will not do. And do you have a contract or agreement? And what do you know about publishing? Ask the questions. It's your book. It's your story. You want to tell it as authentically as you can, being as sensitive, diverse, and inclusive as you can. Get the right people to do it for you. Okay, and ask the questions. When in doubt, ask around. Okay, someone will have an answer for you. Don't just settle. And as for me, Strong Women, Strong Stories, I kind of write a little bit of everything, and I've got my hands all over the place. So I use Linktree as a one-stop. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, there's my webpage. I have writer services, pub services, and I do a podcast. I'd love to have some of you on the podcast. We can talk about what you're writing, what your issues are writing, what your concerns are. I'd talk about all topics. You know, if you're writing a memoir, we can do that. If you're writing romance, we can do that. I love just talking to people and stuff, and we just chat. And no worries, it's not video. I just do the voice. So that's it for me. If anybody has questions, I know we're limited on time and stuff, but you all tell me if you have any other questions.
Well, I think the links should be put in an email maybe and sent to the group.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
send them-
I was going to say, Laura, if you want to email the presentation or the links
Sure,
to me,
sure.
I can make it available either through pen points or just an email out to
Yeah,
any
that's
individual.
perfect.
That would be terrific. Yes,
I'll
thank you.
send you I'll send you the PowerPoint so that way you have that.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's not a problem at all. So yeah, if there are any other questions, thank you for the question on the whole gender thing. That was good. I forgot all about the he, she, they, them. I was like, oh, so I get called so many different things. I don't care. It's like, just, okay. So usually I get a little cranky at work and stuff, if I'm at work and they see me with my hat on, and it's like, sir, and I look down at my boobs and I'm like, I swear I got boobs. They're big. They're out there. I think I'm a girl. So, but that's just me being, me. I just have fun with it. Too many people take offense to too many things anymore. It's just take a breath. There's
Right.
not always intent behind the action and the words. So, and that's what a lot of this was about. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Laura? Well, thank you for coming on. Oh, go ahead, Eileen.
Oh, there you go.
But I just want to say I'm glad you brought up American Dirt. I followed that very closely. And when the controversy started, I was jumping right on the bandwagon. Oh, I won't read this book. But then a book club that I'm in had chosen it. And I thought, oh shit, I've got to read this awful book. I love that book so much. And from the first paragraph, I actually had to put it down and just absorb it for a minute. And then when I looked at the controversy, and she did write in the beginning a bit of a disclaimer saying that, yeah, some people felt that she was not brown enough to have written this story, but that someone needed to write it. And what I loved about the book so much was that it came out in the era when we were seeing children at the southern border kept in cages and separated from their families. And people were saying, why did their parents put them at risk like this? Why didn't they just stay the hell home? And my thought was always with that book that if one person read that book and it changed their mind about the plight of those migrants, that she had done her job. And it's fiction. So for all fiction, there's a bit of, this is not necessarily my story, but I'm telling it in the best way I know how. And I thought she did a wonderful job of portraying the danger in that migrant piece where she brought her child over. I didn't see it as anything disparaging toward Mexicans, except for the drug cartel. And yes, that was disparaging because it should have been. But I just had to say that I just absolutely love that book. I'm with Oprah on that one.
So here, if you don't mind, if we have a few minutes, it's not so much that it was disparaging. It was that she wrote a piece of fiction and said all these things and there was nothing authentic behind what she said. So even though it was true, those things are true, and it was a good book. I agree with Oprah on that. It's a good book. It's a good read, but that wasn't what they took offense to. It wasn't how the cartel was portrayed. It wasn't all that. It was more so a white woman is writing this. Why isn't a brown woman writing this? And this is what I said about extremes. Because while I agree with that, well, a brown woman didn't think of writing that. It was a white woman who wrote it. And if a brown woman did write it, where is it? Now, if the question is, in terms of the publishing world, well, she had more weight to her story than she did, that's a whole other issue. That's a publishing issue. And that's why there are things like we need diverse books and the whole, blow up with the Black Lives Matter. And then all of a sudden, all these publishers are just looking, all these editors online are just looking for pieces written by Black people. I'm like, okay, now we're going to the extremes. We're going from one side to the other and we're not figuring out what the issue is. The issue is stories are stories. They're all out there. Somebody's going to write it. Okay? The question is, are we willing to all accept it? And I don't think we are. And that's where a lot of that controversy came from. But I agree with you. It's a good book.
And I followed it pretty closely, and things like what I thought about was, say, Bill Platt writes about these other worlds, but he's not from those other worlds. It's fiction. So I'm not going to say it's not his story to tell.
Sure.
So it gets confusing. I just had to say, because that was one of my favorite books of the year. And I almost didn't read it because I was sucked into the controversy about who the hell is this woman stealing this story?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the kind of things I was reading. And I jumped right on that bandwagon.
Yep. No, I agree. I like doing things for myself. So I'll read stuff that's supposedly controversial, but I'll also read things that are just accepted for what they are. So, but I get it. I do. But again, your background in reading it is completely different from someone else's background in reading.
As is the case with every book.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. That's why it's about inclusion and not exclusion. So I agree with you on that. Thank you.
I just finished reading a really interesting book that a friend had recommended to me, The Personal Librarian, and it's historical fiction. It's written about the librarian for J.P. Morgan in the 1920s going on up, who was a Black woman from a very old Black family in Washington, D.C., who moved to New York City with her family and passed for white. And what's really interesting about this book, when I first started reading it, my friend knows my background and she recommended this. At first I was like, oh God, this is going to be another one of those tragic mulatto stories where everything falls apart because she passed for white. And I really dislike that construct in literature. But then it didn't go that way. It went a whole nother way. And that was, as I found out when I read the end of the book, it's written by two authors. And a white woman author paired up with a Black woman author to write this book together. And that was fascinating. Reading the end of the book was incredible. They both were fiction writers. They were put together. They were suggested by the publisher of the white woman's publisher. And she was very nervous about attempting a collaboration like this. The other woman was a successfully published author, the Black woman. She didn't really need a writing partner for things, but she got intrigued by the story and wanted to tell it. And so the story ends up writing against that trope of the tragic mulatto. Belle was successful in her life as J.P. Morgan's personal librarian and succeeded in growing his collection that was eventually left to the public. And it's a story that was never told and before, especially in fiction. And how these two writers collaborated, just reading the end of the book, their notes about how the collaboration began was a real wonderful education in how do you present a story that's so interesting, that kind of got left behind by history, but how do you present it in a way that honors the person fully? And they figured it out. It's a really, really interesting book.
Oh, that's cool. What was the name of that?
It's The Personal Librarian. And the two authors are Marie Benedict. She is the white woman who's written many successful books. And the Black woman writer of many successful books is Victoria Christopher Murray.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was a,
Looking for recommendations.
yeah.
Thank you very much. I had a blast with you guys.
Enjoyed it.
This
Very
was fun.
informative,
This was a lot
yes.
of fun. Thank you so
Learned a
much for
lot.
having me.
All right, if you could stop sharing your screen for a moment there, Laura.
Sure, hold on, I gotta
Be
figure
able
it
to-
out now. You would think I'd be more
Great.
tech savvy. There we go.
All right. I think we all enjoyed this today, learned a lot, and something to take forward with us in our endeavors here, and something to keep in mind. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
It was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Really
Yeah.
enjoyed
Great.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
somebody does.
Harry, Ed?
I have one question for Eileen and Laura. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. A lot of food for thought and very helpful. But I had a question for Eileen. I was wondering, Eileen, how you know for sure that Bill's not from Mars?
Every other weekend, Harry, that's all.
I'm gonna check out. Thank you all for having me.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And
Yes,
feel
it was
free to
great.
reach out if you have any questions. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Laura. Harry, that's an excellent question. And, you've really made me think about it. I will say that I have used Sensitivity Reader for a piece that I wrote that never got published. And actually I had a bunch of them, and they came from a group that I'm in. It's a pretty big Facebook group of women writers. And I asked for Sensitivity Read. There's another group that is Sensitivity Readers, and of course you pay. But they were kind enough to give me some feedback. About 5 people responded to my question. And there were 5 different answers. And the question, I was writing about my time spent as an Orthodox Jew. And I was pretty angry in writing it. And I said, is this too angry? Is it going to really piss people off? One said, yes, I wouldn't say that. The other one said, go for it. She had written a memoir about leaving the Orthodox community. So it was interesting. Out of 5 people who lived that lifestyle and were able to give to read it. It was not a whole book, so it was maybe like a 4,000 word essay, but each one of them had a whole different take on it. And so I never even published it because it was too creepy.
Ed?
You do learn to trust yourself.
Yes.
One little anecdote recently, I was reading a story. It's kind of a cute story. It's a nice story. It's a husband and wife who've been married for 42 years. Everything is just wonderful. And then one day an argument comes up about how many times they might have had sex in the 42 years of their marriage. And at one point in the argument, the husband says, don't you have some squaw work to do? So when I ran it by the editor function in Word, that was flagged by editor as being a derogatory comment. I thought that was quite unusual.
Well, but it's a case of where your character said something.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I understand that.
Yes.
But but this is editor who is, some algorithm says that that's a derogatory statement. Don't use that. And in other words, once I changed that statement, then my score went up.
Interesting.
I would say you're both doing your job there, Ed. You're defining your character, and the algorithm is pointing out a possible danger spot or something there.
Exactly. That's exactly what was happening. But I thought that was quite unusual.
Yeah. Well,
I'm gonna have to go, guys.
Okay.
Hey,
all
Jenny.
right, Jenny.
I'll see you next meeting.
Bye, guys. Me too.
All right.
Jenny,
All right.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Harry.
And be Sean, nice to meet you. Nice to see you. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
And whoever's
everyone.
doing the programming,
All right.
That's
well,
Bill.
good
Programming
program
committee,
today,
this is
yeah.
a good
Thank you,
show.
Bill.
It's Mr. Bill.
Yeah,
you,
thank you, Bill.
Mr. Bill.
Mr.
Yeah,
Bill.
Ours
very
rules.
good.
Mr. Bill.
Can we call you Mr. Bill?
Yeah.
Mr.
That,
Bill,
when you, remember the old Mr. Bill
Mr. Bill, that's
cartoon
what I
thing?
said.
It's probably derogatory.
That's why I said
Sorry.
it's Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah,
you
Mr.
can't-
Bill and Sluggo, right?
You can't call him Mr. Bill anymore
No,
Uh-uh.
unless you get permission.
That's
No.
right. Watch my pronouns.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bye,
Everybody have a great
everyone.
weekend.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm
Take care.
gone. Yeah, see ya.
bye.
Well, I leave. Oh, here it is.